Okay, so now we're going to look at the discovered attack. Now, discovered attack is quite a simple type of attack. It's just one where the attack occurs as one piece moves out of the way of another. So in this case, white has a bishop and a rook, and the bishop cannot attack the knight, of course, but the rook can, if the bishop can step out of its way. So if the bishop, for instance, plays the move, let's say bishop to e5, so here we can say that this is a discovered attack. The rook has not moved from its original position, but the piece that was standing in its way has. Now, that's really all there is. A couple of things to note. Let's, for instance, shift the position, right? And let's place this knight. We're going to move this knight one square over, okay? Okay, so here, white can play the same move again, bishop to e5, and we see that still it's a discovered attack, but in this case, because the knight is on a dark square, the bishop can attack it as well, so we have a double attack. This is both a double attack and a discovered attack, right? The lines get a little bit blurred. Now, the final point worth noting is that you could have a situation where the attack is on the king. So let's place that on the board. The knight has disappeared. And now, if white played bishop to d6, for example, then this would be a discovered attack as well, but it would be a particular type of discovered attack, a discovered check. So that's worth keeping in mind. And one very final thing is if we change the position of the king and we place it on b4, let's see what happens then. Now, if white plays the same move again, bishop to d6, now we have still a discovered attack, but it's a check, and we also have a second check. So this is a discovered attack, specifically a discovered check, but it's also a double attack or a double check, right? So you might call this a double check, a discovered check, and you can see that inevitable overlap between the different categories. This is just a part of the game, right? So don't worry too much about that. Let's now move on to looking at some examples. The important thing to keep in mind is that discovered attacks can be extremely powerful, be it an attack on a piece or an attack on the king. And one of the reasons for this is that the piece that is moved, let's say in this case, this bishop that went to d6, it can actually make a threat independent of the threat made by this rook on h4. So let's show what I mean by this with one final example here. Let's add another piece for black, okay? So here, white has one crushing move in this position, and that is the move bishop to g5 check. We see the discovered check, the discovered attack, and the reason why bishop g5 is the best move in the position is because the queen is unable to capture the rook on h4, as happens if, for example, white played the move bishop e5. That would be a big mistake, because black deals with it by capturing the rook and is actually winning. And so what's important to note is that this rook on h4 gives the check, but we see that the piece that was standing in its way, the bishop on g5, is given a really, really important job to do. You know, it can create this threat. And actually, one of the reasons why discovered attacks can be so powerful is because multiple threats can be created at once, right? The rook here attacks the king while the bishop attacks the queen. You can do this a lot with discovered attacks or discovered checks. And this is a very important sort of overarching consideration to keep in mind when it comes to tactics in general. A lot of tactics in chess work because you're able to create more threats than your opponent is prepared to meet. So let's take a look at some real life games now. So in this position taken from an old game, white has a queen and a couple of pawns in exchange for two rooks. So white is actually doing pretty well, but he can actually force an immediate win here. And he did so with the move queen f6 check. The point is that black can only play either king e4 or king d5. Now if king to e4, then white would continue with queen f5 check, and we have a double attack. The rook on d7 is undefended, and so white wins. But if king to d5 instead, then we see a sort of an X-ray on this rook on b2, and white can use that by creating a discovered attack. He plays the move c4, giving check, and at the same time clearing the path. So on the next move, after black recaptures here on c4, white will collect the rook on b2 and easy win. So that is the first example of a discovered attack. Let's move on. Here we have a position between two unknown players, and white actually can win here with the very clever move f4. And so we see here that actually it's a double attack. The bishop is attacking the rook and the pawn is attacking the bishop. But it's also a discovered attack, right? Because the pawn on f3 was standing in the way of the bishop's influence here. So after f4, white is just winning because if black moves his bishop, as he did in the game, he went bishop to c7, then bishop takes d5. And now black played bishop b6, pinning the white queen, but of course his own queen is pinned. But after bishop takes f7, then king takes f7, white actually has the move rook to d4, which just saves his queen. And so, okay, white will emerge a huge material up. So this was not a very good choice, but black didn't have too many options. Rook takes d1 is the only real alternative. But after rook takes d1, again, if the bishop moves, let's say bishop to c7, then bishop to d5 is crushing because of the pin. Now, in this position, if he stops bishop to d5, well, he will lose this bishop on e5 and be down a piece. So that is the second example. Let's now check out another example. Okay, and now here we have a position taken from a game between Vishy Anand with the white pieces and Alex Astaneh. And yeah, Anand, if you have watched enough of my videos, you will have heard his name many times if you didn't already know him. Truly a class act, one of the all-time greats, world champion for many years. And here he shows his class in a game against Mr. Dreyev, who was for a very long time one of the top Russian players. Now, white here actually plays a tactic that is based not only on the discovered attack, but also based on the vulnerability of this rook on b2. He plays the move knight takes d5. Now the point is that if black captures this knight, then white will take the rook on b2, and he will have won a lot of material. And so black had no real choice but to capture on d5 with the pawn. And now we see the point. White plays e6 with a discovered attack on the rook on h8. Black actually only has one move to keep on, to continue the fight, and that is the move king to e7. We'll see what happens if, for example, he moves the rook over to e8. White would capture on f7, and then, let's say, rook to f8. White would go queen f6 check, king to d7, queen c6 check, king to e7, queen c7 check, king f6, rook c6 check, king g7, queen e5 check, king takes, rook c7 check, king g6, rook g7 check, king h6, queen g5 is checkmate. So a forcing sequence, more or less. There were a couple of spots where black could have gone to a different square with the king, but in any case it would have been a checkmate. So the black king is too weak in these situations. If black played, for instance, rook f8 to immediately defend the pawn, then white could even continue with a so-called quiet move, queen f4. And the point is that white isn't immediately giving any sort of check, but he has some really, really devastating threats. There is no defense. So because of this, black played king to e7, rook c3, hitting the queen. It's worth noting that if white captured this rook, that would be a huge mistake, because queen e3 is checkmate. That's a common beginner's mistake, to go after your opponent's pieces and forget that there are certain things you need to watch out for in your own position. Okay, so king to e7, rook to c3. Queen steps back, again threatening checkmate if white captures, but rook c7 check. King goes to e6. Everything else was pretty much as bad. There is no defense. Queen e3 check. King f6. Queen e7 check. King f5. Queen takes f7. King g5. And, well, actually, the game ended right here, but after h4 check, king h6, queen f6 check, king h5, queen g5 would have been checkmate. So one can only assume that Dreyev resigned at that point. So that is really a very nice combination by Anand, and an advanced one, but it uses the power of the discovered attack here. Knight takes d5, e takes d5, e6. This powerful discovered attack combined with the weakness of this rook and the weakness of the black king. Okay, here we have an example taken from a classical game where white was Alexander Alekhine, former world champion, and black was one of the better players of his time, Salomon Floor. So in this position, white has a big advantage, and he continued on with the move e5. Black responded with f5, and here he just ended the game with a powerful discovered attack. He played the move rook to c8. The idea is that now the white queen is attacking the black queen, and black resigned in view of the fact that queen takes e3 is met by what is known as an intermezzo, an in-between move, a Zwischenzug in German. Rook takes rook is check. The king must move, and only now does white capture the queen and is just winning. So that is very powerful, because the reason for the resignation is that the queen is undefended, and if she moves to any square, in fact, actually she doesn't really have any square to go to, because the queen cannot go to a5, the queen cannot go to b4. Just to show, the pawn here is covering the b5 square, the bishop is covering these other squares, and yeah, it's just game over. Ideally, the black queen would like to be able to play a5 or to d6, so that in either case, from d6 it would defend the rook, or from a5 it would defend the rook. But since that's not possible, black is losing a lot of material. Okay, now that we've seen this classical example taken from the early 20th century, let's look at the discovered attack being used by two of the great tacticians of recent times. That's Garry Kasparov, who needs no introduction, and Hikaru Nakamura, one of the top American chess players and top chess players today. Here, in this somewhat difficult position, Hikaru Nakamura's opponent played knight takes f4, but this was well met with a discovered attack. Knight went to d5, and we see here that there is an attack on the black queen, and it's also a double attack because the knight is threatening to capture this bishop on e7. Similar to the last example, black doesn't have any way of removing his queen while defending the bishop, right? Because if he goes to c7, then the knight will capture it. So black actually felt like he had nothing better than queen takes bishop, sacrificing his queen. A rook takes queen, pawn takes knight, and here black has a double attack on the rook and on the bishop, but of course white is up a lot of material, and after pawn takes d5 actually creates a second discovered attack, and that's very useful because if black now grabs this rook on g2, white will not take the knight. It's even more powerful to capture this bishop on e7, since there are many threats. A rook on the 7th is usually very good news for the side that can land the rook on that square. So that's almost all the examples, but we said that I would show one example by the great Garry Kasparov, one of the best chess players in the history of the game. Let's show that not too difficult example to finish the section off. So Garry Kasparov has the white pieces here, and actually his not well-known opponent was doing very, very well. If he had played the move queen to e2 here, actually, although the position remains complicated, it seems to be something close to a draw. Because if, for example, if white plays queen d4, then black will play knight g4 check, say king to g3, knight takes f6, queen takes f6, and now queen g4 check, king h2, queen f4 check, king h3, queen g4 check, and the white king is too vulnerable. Even though this pawn is really a big danger, the position is nonetheless equal. Yeah, so queen to e2 would have been a very, very nice move. Note that the immediate knight to g4 would actually have been a big mistake. Queen takes knight is the point. Pawn takes g4, and now d7. There are no ways of stopping d8 other than to play a move like queen d2. And then after d8, queen takes, bishop takes. This is a winning endgame for white. So this is why black should have played the move queen e2. Not an easy move for a human to spot. Instead, black went wrong with the move knight to d7. And now after queen c4 check, king f8, white plays this move queen c8 check. Now, black has only two options here, king f7 or queen to e8. If king f7, then queen takes d7, king takes f6, queen d8 check, king to g7, queen c7 check, king to f6, and d7 is winning a combination, which for Kasparov would have been effortless to find. The point is that there are no checks against the white king. The only check available would be queen to e5, but the white queen is covering that square. And other than that, the pawn will absolutely promote. So, because of this, black actually played queen to e8. And now white has to move bishop e7 check, king f7, queen c4 check, king g7, all this is forced, and now queen to e6. And we see that even though material is equal, in fact actually black is up a pawn, the activity of the white pieces is just so strong. And importantly, there is an x-ray on this queen on e8, meaning that there may be a discovered attack at some point in the near future. In fact, black played the move g5. There weren't really any good moves out there. Black played the move g5, and now bishop f6 check was a discovered attack on the queen, and it's game over. And the reason why this wins is really very, very instructive and very nice. The point is that if black, for instance, plays the move king to f8, supporting the undefended queen, white will force the king away with the move bishop g7 check. King takes bishop, and queen takes queen. There's nothing to do. If, on the other hand, black captures the bishop, then white calmly exchanges the queen. Black takes the queen, and now black is up a piece, but after the move d7, black cannot stop the pawn from advancing or perhaps even capturing the knight if the knight stays there. Let's say black plays a move like king f7, then d8 queen. So that was very, very pretty, I thought. Now, after queen e6, in fact, just to show there really is absolutely nothing to be done, because this is the thread, and if you want to step your queen away, I mean, of course, if you step your king away, say you go to h6, then bishop g5 is just the same idea, even simpler. The discovered check wins the queen. And if instead you play a move like queen to c8 so that you're still defending the knight, the point is that bishop f6 still works here, because even though white is no longer, of course, threatening to win a queen, black cannot capture the bishop because of the fact that the knight is pinned. So after bishop f6 check, if the king, say, steps to f8, then queen e7 check, king g8, queen g7 is just checkmate immediately. And similarly, if the king goes to h6, there is queen e3 check. And no matter what black does, he can play f4, he can play king h5, he can play g5. In any case, there is mate next move here, queen h3. So yeah, really, I think a very, very nice final example by a tremendous player and a tremendous tactician, Garry Kasparov. So I hope you enjoyed the examples in this section, and I will see you in the next one.